Hi, second grade. This week we're going to be looking at nonfiction stories. Remember that there's a difference between a fiction book and a nonfiction book. Let's review what a fiction book is real quick first. A fiction book is a book kind of like The Color Monster. We read about this a couple weeks ago. This is an example of a fiction book. A fiction book is a book that we read to enjoy and to have fun. A fiction book will usually tell us a story. It has characters, it's making us laugh or smile, and it's usually make-believe. So fiction books are fake. They have make-believe in them. We're going to be talking about nonfiction books all of this week. Nonfiction books are books that we read to learn. So for example, this is a nonfiction book. It's a book that is not fake. It's nonfiction. It's real. We usually read nonfiction books to learn. Nonfiction books always are about something, so they have a topic. For example, this one's a first encyclopedia of science, right? So the topic of this book is science. It usually has a bunch of information, and it's something that is teaching us. So it's a book that is teaching us a bunch of information. In a nonfiction book, we can find many things. We can find a table of contents, we can find captions and graphs and charts and glossaries, and we're going to talk about what all of those things mean in a couple minutes. Just remember that a nonfiction book is a real book that tells and informs and teaches us about things. I'm going to show you guys a couple of things and a couple of features and hints that we can use to find out if a book is fiction or nonfiction. Remember that nonfiction books are not fake. They are always real. So one of the many things about nonfiction books is that they have a lot of different features. One of those features is a table of contents. A table of contents is something that you will always find in a nonfiction book. A table of contents tells us what page we can find things on. So a table of contents usually looks a little bit like this. It'll have a list of chapters on one side, or a list of topics and things that are discussed in the book. And then you can usually follow a line and it'll tell you what page something's on. So a table of contents is usually where you can find a page of whatever information you're looking for. So for example, I don't want to read an entire book. I don't want to read this whole book about all these different science things. I only want to get to the page that talks about the leaves. Or I only want to get to the page that talks about frogs. Or I only want to get to the page that talks about the ocean. So what page can I find that on? Always go to the table of content. The table of contents will always tell you what page you can find things on. And that's always something you'll find in a nonfiction book. There's a couple other things that we find in nonfiction books. This is called a caption. We'll usually find captions in nonfiction books, and a caption are the little sentences that are underneath a picture. So whenever we see a picture and we see a sentence underneath it that talks about the picture, that's a caption. Sometimes you see captions on Instagram and Facebook when people write a sentence about the picture that they post. Same thing with nonfiction books. A caption is a sentence that describes a picture that they're putting in the story. Another thing we always find in nonfiction books are diagrams. A diagram is similar to a caption, but it's when you see a picture and a whole bunch of words around the picture. So I see a picture of an orca whale here, and look at all these words that are telling me where I can find the eye, and the blowhole, and the fin, and the little tail, and the other fin. So this is a diagram. It's teaching us all about the little things. There's a bunch of little words with arrows pointing at all of the different things going on in the picture. So we usually find diagrams in nonfiction books. And I'll give you some examples later. Another thing we will usually find in a nonfiction book is a glossary. A glossary is kind of like a dictionary, but it's a dictionary that's all the way at the end of the book. So we can usually find a glossary at the end of a nonfiction book, and that's just a bunch of words with the definition that was in the book. So all of the words that you find in a glossary are going to be in the book that you just read. So for example, if this is an example of a glossary, it tells me apple, a red fruit that grows on a tree. Bear, a furry mammal that hibernates in the winter. Dog, a mammal that barks and has 4 legs, right? So a glossary is basically just a mini dictionary at the end of a story. So those are a couple of things that you can find in a nonfiction book. Remember, a nonfiction book is a book that teaches us about something. Like this book is teaching us about science. It's giving us real information. It's nonfiction, so it's not fake, it's real. And in a nonfiction book, you can usually find a table of contents. You can find captions underneath the pictures. You can find a diagram. You can find a glossary. So I'm going to show you some examples. The first example is this huge book I have about ants. This book is bigger than my head. So this is a book that I have called Ants, Ants, Ants. So this is a nonfiction book because this book teaches us about ants. And the very first thing that I see when I open this giant book, the very first thing I see is a table of contents. Do you see the table of contents? So for example, if I want to learn about different kinds of ants, I know that I should go to page 2. If I want to learn about where ants are found, I should go to page 8. If I want to learn about ants and their nests, I go to page 10. If I want to learn about a queen and her workers, I go to page 12. This is what a table of contents looks inside of these huge nonfiction books. I'm going to show you another example of some other nonfiction text features. So remember my example that I pulled up earlier? This is a nonfiction book. It's not fake, it's real. It gives us a whole bunch of information about science. So I showed you guys what a table of contents looks like. Now I'm going to show you what a caption looks like. This one has a whole bunch of different captions. So there's a whole chapter about the human body in this book, and there's a caption right here. So it shows us a picture of the hands, and there's some words right next to it. So all of these words are captions because these words describe what's happening in this picture. It says to feel your pulse, to feel your blood being pumped all around your body, press 2 fingers to the side of the wrist, and the beating you feel is called your pulse, right? So it's explaining what's happening in this picture. That's what a caption is. We can also look at diagrams. There's so many diagrams in this nonfiction book right here, right? Remember the diagram had a bunch of little words pointing to the different parts of the whale? Here we have a diagram. You have all these little words pointing to different parts of this picture. That's another diagram. There's so many diagrams in this picture. Look at this one. This one's kind of cool. Look at this diagram. It's all about a skeleton, right? So these are the different bones in our skeleton, and it's teaching us, this diagram is showing us all of the different bones, the skull, the shoulder blade, all of the different bones you have are in this diagram because they're pointing at things, just like this diagram has words that are pointing to the different parts of the whale. So the diagram usually teaches us, it's a picture that has a bunch of different labels. We can also find a glossary, usually at the end of a nonfiction book. And look at this glossary, it's so many words. This glossary only had a couple of words, just apple and bear and dog and egg, frog and glue, right? The glossary is like a mini dictionary at the very end of a book. So it has the word and the definition. Here are all of these words. Bacteria, a tiny single-celled creature, contract, to get smaller, galaxy, a huge group of stars, right? So it has words and the definition of the word. So all week we're going to be talking about nonfiction books this week, and we're going to talk all week about the different things you can find in a nonfiction book. Remember the ones we talked about today? We talked about a table of contents. That's what page you can find things on. We also talked about captions, the sentence underneath the pictures. We also talked about diagrams, the labels that are all around a picture. And we talked about the glossary. These are all like little mini dictionaries that have definitions of words. So remember that nonfiction stories are all real books that teach us about something. This book teaches us about science. All nonfiction books teach us about stuff and give us information about a specific topic. So we're going to be talking about nonfiction books all week long.